You know Billy Hatcher? Well, of course you do. He was a renowned baseball player who worked his way up into the Major League 1984 season for the Chicago Cubs. It's hard not to be passionate about the history of the sport and... okay, for real, who is this guy? So, you can probably reasonably assess what a video like this will be about. I'm not gonna give an elaborate breakdown of what is ultimately an extremely subjective criteria. These are some worlds that are small, fairly chill, and that I've personally found poignant enough to check out their respective games. To the extent that, say, rolling around giant eggs in a rooster costume can be considered of the arts. Which is to say, I don't think it matters either way. Before the Sega logo even appears on the game's boot up, I had my eyes set on one particular locale in 2003's Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, the snow level. I have a strong attachment to wintry places in a lot of things, and video games give me the opportunity to frolic around in snow-filled environments. Fantastical, because I don't remember the last time I've seen a snowflake. And apparently, Billy Hatcher's snow level might not be real either. Somehow, for some reason, the game's fan wiki provides zero in-game screenshots of Blizzard Castle other than its appearance in Sega and Sonic All-Stars Racing as a race course. The page is a bit barren in general, which isn't too surprising, but that particular detail genuinely had me taken aback. I had to play and find out for myself. Here's what Blizzard Castle actually looks like. This might be the first time any soul has laid eyes on this stage in nearly 23 years. It was basically lost media, not counting anything else that's readily accessible on the internet. And I gotta admit, damn. Across the stage's first 3 missions, you see the environment evolve from a vicious snowstorm pouring down upon a ceaseless night, to the crack of dawn bringing the mountain-high fortress new life, and to the artificial blizzard subsiding for the natural snowfall. Beyond saving the Elder like the other stages, you can truly feel the narrative weight of your actions through just the minute differences in the weather. And amidst the snow-capped castle through both day and night, is a genuinely kind of beautiful, sprawling map in all 3 axes, almost always providing a way to loop back into a previous section, usually with multiple junction points. Even with the persistent level timer that goes down to the centisecond, it doesn't feel wrong to hang around longer than what would be optimal, accidentally or otherwise. On my way to Blizzard Castle though, many thoughts came to mind about this game. To get straight to the point, yeah, Billy Hatcher is really damn good. And it's also Super Sega 64 Sunshine. It has a small set of distinct stages split into several missions with differing object layouts that have a glowing collectible act as the end reward, and restoring daytime to each part of the central locale along the way. Move over, Mario. We've got Billy in town. Obviously, collectathon platformers were a well-ingrained part of the family-friendly gaming space by the early 2000s, but even pushing aside the potentially coincidental scenario similarity, I kind of find it difficult to not see Billy Hatcher as a more upfront take on where Mario was at the time, infused with Sega's arcade design sensibilities. And I think that's partly what made the game shine for me, where the sun doesn't shine. While certainly not as fantastical as the early Sonic games, the environments of the stages still have distinctive secondary motifs that elevate them past the typical grass, beach, and lava biomes that serve as their basis. Pirates Island, as the name suggests, revolves around an oceanside stronghold once dominated by piracy, having been taken over by the game's shape-shifting foes. Dino Mountain is all about newly stimulated rocks barreling straight towards you, Jurassic or otherwise. And Forest Village at least has a cool hidden waterfall cave, as any work of fiction should. And exploring these weird crevices is encouraged not solely through mission objectives, but the scoring system underpinning the gameplay to begin with. Not only is your score tracked, but you get graded for your overall performance, which naturally incentivizes building familiarity with the layout of each stage for optimal runs. The reused level geometry between missions letting that knowledge lead into quicker improvement, and overall, breathing a bit of extra life into what might otherwise be one-and-done objectives in other collectathons, or at best, providing a time attack mode for those really dedicated. I'm probably overselling it when I say this, but I honestly think it's kind of ingenious. Billy Hatcher is a pretty solid 3D platformer elevated by some really smart design decisions. It's easy to tell the people who made it had been honing their craft for years. There's even a couple homages to previous games from the devs scattered throughout some missions, one of which being a power-up resembling a purple jester hat. From Knights. Unlike the other games that'll be discussed, I actually have a bit of pre-existing history with Nights into Dreams. Well, emphasis on a bit. I picked up the HD version for free before it got delisted and messed around with the first stage or so. I didn't get particularly far, but I was really gelling with Nights' unique 2.5D gameplay style. Just not the weird-looking updated visuals with the smoothed-out character models and environment textures. The Saturn version's crisp, sharp pixels with jagged polygons always made the game's art design a lot more cohesive and appealing to me, which is why I've opted to play the original release more recently, including for this video. There's some backstory provided in short FMVs if you decide to wait for the title screen's attract mode, but even without that context, it's easy to grasp just how starkly beautiful Nights' world is. The stages are plenty weird, embodying a particular Jungian reflection of the two human characters, of course, but Nights themselves, uninhibited by our notions of material reality, provides an equally bizarre axis to travel along, quelling what might be an otherwise blinding dream into a vivid one. Or as some might say, a cool-ass flying jester. Claris' Spring Valley is like a melange of saturation and oscillation, masquerading as a regular grassy first stage. It's great. Actually, with a few exceptions, most stages lean heavily on these lush greens and blues, derived from, you know, the real world. Mystic Forest brings forth a darker, more enigmatic take on that aesthetic, trees that engulf the sky from their foliage, with only stray beams of blue light cutting through into the rivers and ruins below. And Elliot's Frozen Bell is set on this almost alien-looking backdrop of realistic glacier cliffs and overhangs, contrasted with the cyan-tinted clouds on a deep blue sky. To put it succinctly, it's very emblematic of its era. The heavy usage of pre-rendered CG stage elements is far from surprising, especially given the developer's prior history. Once again, this is another Sonic team endeavor. No bias, I swear. And it's evident how much further they were able to push the surreal tone of a game like Sonic CD on the much more capable Sega Saturn. The weird shit isn't solely locked away to the English poems on the Japanese cover art, though we've got that too. The subtext of the 16-bit platformer is pulled to the forefront of the 32-bit action game. Actually, what kind of game is Nights? Well, whatever it is, it involves a lot of constant player action from the moment you take control of Nights to dealing the final blow to the stage boss. You could not take a breather whatsoever within the 10-minute or so duration of each stage. This game could give me neck pain I didn't even know I could experience. That's how arcadey we're talking. And don't get me wrong, it's certainly fun for the most part, but it's easy to lose track of what's happening amidst the vibrant, low-resolution visuals. And even when I can parse what I'm looking at, the game hits you with boss encounters where the strategy is unclear, which can completely kill your run without recourse if you don't come prepared. There's just too little room to really chill out in Nights into Dreams. Two polar opposite ideals clashing. It can be, without question, nightmarish. By the way, did you know that Nights also supports widescreen on the Saturn? Despite all the mayhem in the gameplay loop, I wouldn't say it gets too much in the way of my personal enjoyment of the setting. In fact, I think they were almost certainly aware of Nights into Dreams' thematic appeal past its arcadey front. Besides the human sections, which are functionally fail states you need to get out of, the game is host to an ecosystem collectively known as the A-Life system. Nighttopians roam the stages with moods that can vary, and can be bred with one another, including other enemies, making eggs that can be hatched by Nights themselves, or you can end up accidentally killing them if you aren't careful. If this is ringing any bells, that's because the system would later be iterated upon in Sonic Adventure's Chow Garden, even being listed as a life in the first game's credits. They're equally as intricate, equally as questionably beneficial to regular gameplay, and equally as significant to fleshing out their respective games' narrative beyond story cutscenes and the like. And above all else, beating a boss and seeing that result screen is like the hysteric onslaught of dream and nightmare, settling down into one simple feeling: peace. No matter what amount of difficulty comes before, or on subsequent runs, reaching this moment never fails to be worth the trouble. The pressure of the game loop lifted, letting Nights' atmosphere fully proliferate for a brief moment as a highlight reel of your run plays in the background. Damn. And on the topic of Nights related stuff, but mainly because I personally think it's cool, Christmas Nights is honestly kind of its own rabbit hole, with just how many side activities they packed into a single stage demo disc, but as it relates to chill game spaces, it's also locked the fuck in. Look at this beautiful ass holiday reskin of Spring Valley. The Christmas theming is such a weirdly natural extension to this game and its characters, and the reason for which is probably very obvious to most and probably just so happens to be escaping my mind in particular. And at the end of the stage, you get to listen to the absolutely killer vocal track, Dreams Dreams, from the full game on the score screen. This is what Christmas spirit is truly about, emulating 30-year-old Sega Saturn games with a tear or two in the eye. Chill vibes can be found even in games that seem antithetical to notions of rest, and that's something we'll see more of a little later. But for now, I think I'm just gonna go fish. Now, for this next game in particular, I deliberately set out to play it on real hardware. I don't have a GameCube or Wii lying around, let alone a Sega Saturn, but what I do have is an analog pocket. And god be damned, I'm gonna try and make the most out of this strange little over-engineered toy for retro gamer freaks, like myself. This is Legend of the River King for the Game Boy Color. Now, of course, I could easily discuss how River King exists in relation to the series formerly known as Harvest Moon, and the shared DNA between the two as a result of both being from the same developer, but I think I'd rather cut to the chase. Speaking as a complete fishing game novice, so I could be wrong, River King seems to take a very unique approach to fishing simulation, specifically a bunch of RPG elements from top to bottom. A leveling system, experience points to go with it, the top-down perspective, the command menu tailored specifically for the fishing mechanics. God, there's even random encounters with enemies in turn-based combat. It's the whole reason why areas have an inn to rest at, when you get battered up from fighting for your life. The punchline being, these enemies are just regular wildlife that just so happen to cross the protagonist's path. A scary spider showing up next to a riverbed is recontextualized through the eyes of a child, as a Dragon Quest-esque one-on-one battle, a franchise from its very inception targeted towards a younger, console-oriented demographic. Obviously, you could probably trace the game structure itself to Dragon Quest's influence on the Japanese console market in general, but it happens to lend itself to a unique atmosphere for the game's world, more so than other simulation games of its ilk, that I've personally seen anyway. And once you get to actually fishing, you get to listen to what is genuinely some of the most soothing 8-bit ambience on the system, the background music cutting short in favor of tides of white noise, and the occasional arpeggiated chirps of cicadas. At least that's what I assume they're meant to represent. Not that the regular music is bad, but it going silent is ultimately what makes the act of fishing in this game truly resonate with me, and if it weren't for everything I just mentioned, I don't think I would have ever tried working past this game's insanely obtuse learning curve. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to actually reel in the fish. The face buttons would just temporarily stall it, and it would always get away. Or hell, even just the moment when exactly I needed to press a button to initiate the underwater sequence without accidentally canceling it and wasting bait. The game doesn't really seem to explain itself on its own. Eventually, after skimming through a scan of the original game's manual and 2 different game facts guides, I sort of started to get it. In hopes of passing this knowledge to anyone remotely interested in playing, basically, you wait for the long-held beep to press a face button whenever a fish circles your line, and then wait for the fish to slow down to a stop before attempting to reel it in, assuming you don't get bad luck and it off-screens before you get the chance. Also, I still don't have any clue if there's a specific technique to casting your line, beyond placing it near as many fish as possible. It really does make you feel like a stupid kid who doesn't know what they're doing, aimlessly hacking away in rivers with fish who might not budge for several minutes no matter how you act. And then you retreat back to safety, resting to try another time. Maybe you get your shins kicked in by a crow along the way, because God had it out for 9-year-old capped boys that day. And to me, as someone who's never been less than miles away from the nearest fishing rod, something about that feels genuine. Maybe a bit cynical, but with a whimsy that never ceases to keep me trudging through the dead air that often permeates my play sessions. I didn't grow up in the Japanese countryside during the 20th century, but this game's depiction of that sort of childhood, akin to the likes of Boku no Natsuyasumi, I can't help but feel just a bit of secondhand nostalgia, you could call it. And I have tried some of the later games in search of a smoother play experience. Again, mainly the handheld ones, since I find the patient playstyle more conducive to a portable form factor, but they kinda lose some of the edge that made the earlier games so compelling to me to begin with. That text-based command menu gets simplified into a list of icons. Stats like your level and EXP get buried outside of the situations where they're immediately pertinent. And the overall visual presentation is a lot softer looking alongside the switch to an isometric perspective. I wouldn't call any of these changes unwarranted. They're pretty sensible for a long-running series going well into the 2000s, but conversely, that also means they feel less like old-school JRPGs. Or RPGs in general, really. I don't even know if the later games even have turn-based battles. These games no doubt have a kind of cult following. I came across a page on a Harvest Moon / River King fan site for the Japan-only GBA game, with form activity going up to the present day despite the main page layout looking as old as the game itself. Which is awesome, by the way. But ultimately, the direction River King went in before its ongoing nearly 20-year-long hiatus still feels a bit alienating to me, personally speaking. No, I never managed to leave Torrent, the small starting town. I fished up pretty much everything but a cutthroat trout that this one girl wants to cook for dinner, my save file perpetually frozen at noon, in a game without a day-night cycle. But it was still nice to virtually wind down by the river, whether I was outside myself or in bed. You could say it's a kind of cozy game. But such a nomenclature isn't real, therefore it holds zero connotations with any pre-existing works, and thus, I will never use it. Anyways, I think it's about time we move on to the next game. What might be the one with the chillest atmosphere out of everything else in this video. And no, I'm not being facetious here. As funny as that would be. To give some personal background, I was never really that much of an adventure game guy. Action-adventure, sure, but never really capital A adventure games of the text or graphical variety, despite having a passing interest in Secret of Monkey Island, Grim Fandango, and whatnot. Oftentimes, I'd purposely slow down in a game like Half-Life 2 just to soak in the genuinely stellar atmosphere crafted by the artists and level designers, or drive aimlessly in the time trial mode of Mario Kart, despite the game's insistence that I was going the wrong way. Both of these, and many more, being to varying degrees of active detriment to my gameplay, because I wanted to seek out comforting virtual spaces. That all started to change when a little game came out, Emio, the Smiling Man. It was a fucking Nintendo game. I'm sorry, this is who I am. And me deciding to take a chance on Emio is ultimately what enlightened me to the power of Japanese ADV games, through its really compelling character and story writing. I didn't realize games could be good like that, in that particular manner. I've actually known about Paranormasight for a couple years, but its sequel getting announced is what finally pushed me over the edge to check the original out, after seeing it in a Nintendo Direct, and purchasing it for play on my Nintendo Switch 2 system. Trademark. While I've already sunk a bit of playtime into this game before deciding to discuss it for a video, I think the best way to get across what I feel this game does right with its atmosphere is to start at the beginning. Around that point, anyway. You're thrust into the role of Shogo Okie, who's awoken in the middle of a park by Yoko Fukunaga, a recent friend of his searching for the titular 7 mysteries after her dog passed away in a car accident. Like in the game itself, it was also night when I started playing, me almost being lured into a false sense of security from the latent atmosphere, presented by both their kooky conversation and the virtual late-night surroundings coated in a deep blue. This is where a key design element comes into play, being able to poke around a 360-degree view of a given area, not only alleviating potential background repetitiveness, but also an unsurprising vehicle for horror. When I say this game has a chill world, here's what I mean. A fundamental building block shared between the not-horror games from earlier and Paranormasight is their piercing sense of atmosphere. You become familiar with their elaborate but confined locales through repeat gameplay, whether that means starting out from unique viewpoints or a simple recurring player action. Where that atmospheric magnitude is applied is a matter of tonal intent. Even still, all roads lead to oscillation, a kind that isn't more starkly exemplified than with horror. The slow burn tension of two friends speaking to each other in the dead of night comes from how it's presented. If you're already privy to the outcome, or simply unaware of the full context, you might find it downright relaxing. Paranormasight's setting is grounded in the real-world neighborhood of Honjo, virtually every location within replicated with pinpoint accuracy. Through the game's Files menu, paired alongside the fictitious world building, is fairly extensive real-world history you gather as you travel to their corresponding spots on the map. Perhaps Tokyo isn't somewhere you've been, let alone Japan as a whole, but Honjo is nevertheless a regular part of a regular city at the quietest hour of the day, before all that gets punctuated with a bit of terror. Likewise, the character art corroborates normalcy with a conventional anime/manga aesthetic, at a glance. But again, more realistic features are incorporated like fully fledged nostrils, lips, visible lower teeth when characters open their mouths, etc. It's off-putting enough to be conducive for a bit of body horror, without needing to abandon what makes typical anime and manga aesthetics so appealing to begin with. And more pertinently, retaining that ubiquitous design ethos to invoke a sense of normalcy. All in all, it feels very human. There's quite a bit of trial and error when it comes to the gameplay, figuring out the triggers for other curse bearers' abilities, what kind of response Shogo should give, and perhaps a smidge of discretion towards following the exact orders of a stranger off the street. You will die many times, but there's something strange going on with Shogo's role as the player character. You can't toss away that lighter until you succumb to its flame beforehand on a previous attempt. Like, why don't the conditions for other story paths open up until after completing your first route? Why do various parts of the game involve a bizarre, out-of-universe presence guiding you? Why is there a volume setting for voices in a game without voice acting? Why are the menus presented like an old tube TV? There's a mysterious aura radiating off Paranormasight, which I will refrain from elaborating any further on. Seriously, check this game out for yourself if you haven't. It's like $20. I'm still working through my own playthrough, so my thoughts aren't going to be representative of the full experience, though if there's one thing I can say, the early parts leave one hell of an impression. And like I said earlier, the latest Famicom Detective Club entry is partly what led to me playing Paranormasight in the first place. And while I'd personally say the two series seem a fair bit distinct from each other, both FDC and Paranormasight, at least the first one, share the common thread of horror games set around the 80s, starring young male protagonists facing paranormal threats. And for the latter, the particular way color and graininess is employed makes it feel like a high-quality scan of an old movie's film print. It's a presentation style I greatly adore, even if my post-Y2K ass doesn't really get the full picture, like with many things in life. I suppose if I were to give these small chill game worlds a definition, it would be one beyond verbalization, the not quite sensible spaces, whether because of a literal generational gap, or simply being so fantastical that either way still manage to find a common ground with your feelings, rather than more material, compartmentalized analysis like solely looking at mechanics or narrative, or what have you. Sort of like the whole of the sum. Classifying that feeling to begin with feels arbitrary, and maybe it is, but I'd still like to communicate that feeling the best way I can, though I have limits, which sometimes is the direct result of returning to a previous game and forgetting details from prior play sessions, or even game elements that are communicated in promotional material that one is bound to stumble across before playing. After completing my first path in Paranormasight and unlocking the story chart, I was presented with another path that turned out to be much shorter, practically a joke ending in how the characters evacuate from the moment of the main inciting incident, Yoko's death, only for Shogo to still end up dead by morning. And for the first time, the credits rolled. But not only was that not the end of the game, 3 more protagonists were introduced with their own story paths. Shogo Okia was basically the tutorial, a small excerpt of a narrative likely much greater than him. Man, I think I'm gonna play another baby game. Here's the one and only game I played in full prior to working on this video. Well, partially. I'm not really sure how one would even quantify progress in a collection of multiple games, but I've got some things to say about the remaster of Klonoa 2, Lunatia's Veil. Last time on Phantasy Reverie series, a really sad thing happened to Klonoa. It made me sad. But none of that crap matters now. Klonoa's wound up in a brand new scenario, somewhere amidst the sea, where a storm brews across the small rocky islet not too far from land, and with it a whole new conflict. And that's the setting for the opening stage of this mascot platformer game, Sea of Tears. Pretty damn cool. I honestly wasn't sure how you could even follow up a game like the first Klonoa, especially given how it ends. But to brush aside what it means for Klonoa to end up in more dreams, I love the contrast this creates with the more by-the-numbers, green grass, blue skies seen in the first game. One focuses on the soothing breeze of windmills, while the other escalates into oppressive gales of a rainstorm. Same basic concept, but made more turbulent in a manner that feels befitting of a sequel. We've got 2 new companions this time around, Lolo, the aspiring priestess, and Popka, the weird dog thing who speaks in a vaguely Brooklyn accent. While they mainly reside in Klonoa's ring during gameplay, they still make the adventure as a whole feel a lot less lonely. A nice little trio getting to bounce off each other during cutscenes. That, and intermittently returning to a central spot after collecting powerful gems, feels a little reminiscent of early Dragon Ball. Though definitely not as lengthy. I'd say closer to a bite-sized 13-episode anime series. The perfect tone for a game like this. And it's got atmosphere, alright. There's a theme park that leads you through a haunted house, a wartime European city where you weave in and out of the sewers, a twisting museum that looks more like the art inside, a whole-ass stage set on a mountainous boat, all excellently realized through the 2.5D level maps, further accentuating the sense of space from the first game. You straight up revisit previous stages in Klonoa 2, their environments and layouts distorted as a part of the overarching story conflict. New gimmicks compounding the old, new set pieces crashing through the once tamer settlements. And it's not solely more of the same gameplay either. There's whole stages where you swiftly snowboard down terrain, sometimes indulging in full 3D space without deviating too far from Klonoa's core design principles. And overall, the boarding is just a blast in general. While far from being overhauled, Klonoa's movement is given new intricacies through other stage elements, like the mid-air hooks he can leap off, as well as new enemy types that provide different kinds of double jump opportunities. This duology may seem like easygoing platformers on the surface, but in practice, they're dark and twisted with game essence and above-average skill ceilings, kicking your ass when you least expect it, in a sorta Yoshi's Island manner if you get what I mean. Though, as much as I truly adore this game's locales from top to bottom, that feeling begins to sink in once again. that as nice as it is being able to play Klonoa 2 and its predecessor on modern platforms, there might be something lost in the remastering process. Phantasy Reverie series presents very saturated versions of these games, and that alongside the overall increase in visual fidelity can make certain areas pop like never before. But at the same time, a stage like Sea of Tears, all its dreary seaside atmosphere I gushed about earlier, the intensity and overall cohesion feels weirdly hampered? It's a bit hard to explain, but it's a certain unpolished vibe you might be all too familiar with in other remakes and remasters, beyond merely taking the art design in a different direction. I can't imagine among Bandai Namco's other projects that Phantasy Reverie series was a particularly high-budget production, especially given how rudimentary the cutscenes can look, all of which makes me wonder, how does it compare with the original on PS2? Ooh, that is not the greatest first impression. The dramatic lighting from the original is almost entirely flattened, with character models looking overly bright, an intense bloom effect becoming especially garish in cave sections, and various other minor visual faults. From what I can tell, it doesn't seem like the cutscene animation was significantly overhauled between the two versions, but the increase in visual fidelity in other areas makes the weaknesses of their presentation stand out more. Thankfully though, there is something of a silver lining for the remaster's visuals in later areas. It obviously goes for a different aesthetic to begin with, but if you can accept that, there's actually quite a bit the newer version has to offer, and even some spots where it's arguably a step above the original. Sunnier stages, like La Lakusha, provide a vibrant take on the mellower colors of the OG that doesn't feel at odds with the level theming. The water on Baguji's island feels a whole lot more watery than the weirdly dark, opaque sludge on PS2. And the glowing rainbow gradient in the fight against Leptio instead of colored buildings is visually distinctive in a pretty dreamlike manner. In general, the increased color saturation lends the remaster a more dreamy look to its world that I feel has its own appeal, even if it suffers from issues that are all too common in many remasters out there. Though in comparison, the PS2's gentler colors in its art gives things a more naturalistic look, while also giving its characters variable width outlines. Genuinely impressive looking stuff for a 2001 game. I kinda dig both of their tones in equal parts. Neither of their visions for Klonoa 2's visions feel wrong to me. So, it's hard to say there's really any high-caliber tragic twists in Klonoa 2. I bring this up since the first game is sorta infamous for having a heart-wrenching ending that flips your entire perception of the game world on its head, and Klonoa's role within it. You can only pull the protagonist learns the world isn't their own trick once. And so, he takes on a new title, Klonoa, the Dream Traveler. With a bit of hesitance, he's fully capable of springing into action and helping those in need, even if his naivety might lead to a lapse in his judgment. Despite that, Klonoa feels a lot more experience here than he did before, which could solely be due to his redesign in this game, but I can't help but feel it extends to his mannerisms. Even if that shift on its own is fairly minor, the entire narrative texture of this game still feels different because of it. That's why I find it so interesting that the true antagonist of Klonoa 2 is someone who represents a troubling emotion, buried deep into the earth, only to re-emerge clearer than ever. And perhaps for the first time, someone who looks eerily similar to the main hero, the dreamer without a home, without family. During the main story, their physical similarities aren't ever lampshaded. Klonoa takes it for granted, and moves forth with helping him find a place in a world that has so desperately tried to move on without him, that hates him. I've seen some view this game's climax through the lens of the disillusionment of adulthood, or something along those lines. It seems to be a commonly held belief, going off YouTube uploads of the game's soundtrack, anyway. But that wasn't exactly the vibe I was getting. It's certainly within the ballpark of human life, if the persistent imagery of eggs and DNA strands and levels is anything to go by. Here's how I'd put it. Having already dealt with the pain of separation before, Klonoa still pushes onward to this new dream, to tag along with new allies he'll eventually need to part ways with. Because a life's meaning comes from what you make of it, even if times of anguish will inevitably come down the road. It's hard to have those happier times without the full spectrum of human emotion, the highs, the lows, and all the other axes. The King of Sorrow is the part of him scarred by his prior experience, ultimately consoled with the help of Klonoa's friends, and even some forgiven adversaries. I'm not gonna pretend like anything I said constitutes remotely groundbreaking story analysis. Most of that is probably textual, but at the very least, it's fun to talk about in the first place. And that's what makes this particular world so nice to be in, as fleeting as your time here might be.